25,000 years ago, a hunter is lying flat in wet snow, not moving, barely breathing. 30 meters away, a mammoth herd is grazing on frozen grass. And here's the thing. People get wrong about this moment. He's not looking at the biggest one. He's not looking for a fight. He's looking for the weak one, the old one, the one that's limping just a little. Because here's a fact that surprises most people. Prehistoric humans almost never hunted healthy adult mammoths head on. That would have been suicide. What they actually did was smarter, and honestly, a lot more interesting than the movies show you. It's the last ice age, and this hunter, let's call him Boar, lives on the open mammoth steppe, a landscape that doesn't really exist anywhere on Earth today. Picture dry grassland stretching for hundreds of kilometers, cold enough for permafrost, but weirdly not covered in deep snow, because it was simply too dry for that. This environment supported huge herds of woolly mammoths, along with wild horses, bison, and woolly rhinos, all moving across the same open plains. Winters here could drop far below freezing, with wind that cut straight through anything less than proper tailored clothing, which is exactly why survival depended on more than just toughness. It depended on planning. Boar's Camp isn't a cave. Real sites like Mezherish in Ukraine, about 15,000 years old, show that people in this world built actual houses out of mammoth bones, sometimes using the remains of dozens of animals, stacked and arranged, covered with hides. This wasn't a random pile. Archaeologists who studied Mezherish found the bones were sorted and arranged with real structural logic, almost like a blueprint. Skulls used as a foundation, tusks curved inward to form supporting arches. On a landscape with almost no trees for wood, bone became the building material of choice, and that alone tells you these people were engineers as much as hunters. Here's where we need to slow down and get honest, because this is where a lot of documentaries get it wrong. A healthy adult mammoth weighed up to 6 tons, had thick skin and a heavy layer of fat, and could crush a person without even trying. Going after one with a wooden spear would be like attacking a moving truck with a stick. So what did hunters like Boar actually do? They watched the herd for days, sometimes weeks, looking for an individual with a disadvantage. A young calf that strayed too far from its mother. An old male pushed out of the herd by younger bulls. An animal that was sick, injured, or stuck in mud or a bog. This is actually backed up by the bones themselves. At several kill and butchery sites across Europe and Russia, the remains that show clear signs of human hunting are disproportionately young or old individuals, not prime healthy adults. This matches exactly what modern predators like lions and wolves still do today when they target herds of large animals. It's not about bravery. It's about picking a fight you can actually win and doing it with almost zero margin for error. Because one bad decision could mean losing a hunter the entire group depended on. Now let's kill a myth while we're here. You've probably seen the classic image of cavemen digging a giant pit trap and mammoths falling in. It's a great visual. It's also almost certainly wrong, or at least massively overstated. Digging a pit big enough and deep enough to trap a mammoth in frozen or semi-frozen ground using only bone and wood tools would take an enormous amount of time and effort, and there simply isn't strong archaeological evidence that this was a common method. What the evidence actually points to is something more patient and far more tactical. Hunters used the landscape that was already there. Bogs, marshes, river crossings, and steep riverbanks where a heavy animal could get stuck or lose its footing in an instant. Once a mammoth was in a vulnerable position, like stuck in mud, hunters could approach carefully and use spears, not to kill instantly, but to wound it repeatedly and let blood loss and exhaustion do the rest over hours, or sometimes over a day or two. This wasn't quick or clean. It required the entire group to stay close, tracking the animal's movements, waiting for the moment it could no longer run. Spear points from this period, found at sites in Russia and Siberia, including the Yana site, which is around 28,000 years old, were sometimes made from mammoth ivory itself, carefully shaped into points nearly half a meter long. That's a strange kind of poetry, if you think about it. The animal's own tusk, taken from a mammoth that died naturally or was hunted before, becoming the exact weapon later used against another one. A downed mammoth wasn't just meat. It was honestly the biggest resource windfall this group would see in months, maybe in the entire year. Every single part had a use. The meat was obviously food, and one mammoth could feed a group for weeks if they could preserve it properly, which in an ice age climate mostly meant freezing it in the permafrost or drying strips of it in the wind. The hide became shelter covering, bedding, and clothing, stitched together using bone needles that have actually been found at sites from this exact period. Proof that this wasn't just draping skins over your shoulders, it was real tailoring. The bones became construction material, tools, and even fuel, since wood was scarce on the open steppe, and dried bone actually burns surprisingly well once the fat inside it has been rendered out. The tusks became raw material for spear points, needles, and carved objects. Some of the oldest known art in the world, small carved figurines from sites like Vogelherd in Germany, were carved from mammoth ivory around 35,000 years ago. Tiny detailed sculptures of lions, horses, and birds. So this wasn't just survival. It was also where some of humanity's earliest creative expression came from, carved by firelight after the work of the day was done. Let's go back to those houses at Mezhirich for a moment, because they genuinely deserve more attention than they get. Archaeologists found several circular structures built almost entirely from mammoth bones, skulls stacked to form outer walls, tusks used as arching supports overhead, and long leg bones used almost like architectural beams to hold everything in place. This wasn't a one-time experiment either. Similar mammoth bone dwellings have been found at other sites across Ukraine and Russia, meaning this was a real, repeated tradition, not a lucky accident. Building one of these wasn't a weekend project. It likely required the bones of dozens of mammoths, meaning either a group hunted several animals over a long period of time, or more likely, they were also actively collecting bones from mammoths that had already died naturally, somewhere on the steppe. That detail actually matters a lot, because it tells us these groups weren't only hunters. They were resourceful in every direction, hunting when they had to, scavenging whenever they could, and building for the long term in a landscape with almost no trees and almost no shortcuts. By around 10,000 years ago, the mammoth steppe itself started disappearing as the climate warmed and the dry grassland slowly turned into forest and wetter tundra that simply couldn't support the same massive herds anymore. Mammoth populations collapsed across most of the world within a relatively short span of time. A few small, isolated populations actually survived on remote islands like Wrangel Island in the Arctic Ocean until roughly 4,000 years ago, which is honestly wild to think about since that means woolly mammoths were still alive after the pyramids of Egypt were already standing. As the mammoths disappeared, the entire way of life built around them, the hunting techniques passed down through generations, the bone architecture, the ivory carving traditions, disappeared along with them. Not because the people failed, not because they weren't smart enough or skilled enough, simply because the world underneath their feet completely changed faster than any hunting strategy could adapt to. So the next time you picture a caveman throwing a spear at a mammoth for no reason, remember, it was never that simple. It was patience, tracking, reading an animal's weakness from a distance, and using a landscape that could kill something a spear alone never could. It was houses built from the bones of giants, tools carved from tusks, and art made by firelight in a world that no longer exists anywhere on Earth. If you want to see what happened when humans faced something even more dangerous than a mammoth, subscribe, because next time we're talking about the predator that actually hunted humans back.